Okay, our next speaker is coming to us remotely. Her name is Aldyen Donnelly. She's a principal at WDA Consulting. She has been a small business developer and consultant for over 40 years. Starting in the 1990s, she started to work on market-driven strategies to reduce atmospheric carbon concentrations. She gathered together a Canadian emissions reduction credit, or ESC buyers group, where she developed and executed major forward ERC purchase agreements and some world first to finance, including carbon sequestration and agricultural soils, stationary fuel cell application, landfill gas recovery and utilization projects, carbon capture and storage projects, and many more. So we're really excited to have her with us from Vancouver, Canada. So thanks for being here, Aldyen.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Before I go to the next slide, these have been wonderful presentations, and now that I've listened to everybody else's presentation, I don't like my slide deck, so I'm gonna be a little bit all over the park. But what I like to do, especially when it's a session like this where there won't be time for a lot of Q&A, is invite everybody and anybody who thinks they want to after this and for as up to a week, send questions you'd like me to respond to Mary, and then I'll get Mary to send them to me, and then I'll produce a follow-up slide deck in a couple of weeks. That is my best attempt to answer any questions that show up in Mary's inbox. So please take me up on that offer. Next slide, please. I think I want to start with first principles because we've lost that. We often talk about emissions reductions and our sequestration, and that's problematic to begin with because our Earth and our atmosphere are a closed system. So at least until the next asteroid hits. So if our goal in climate policy is to reduce atmospheric concentrations of heat trapping gases, which are carbon and nitrogen compounds, the only possible way to have less of those heat trapping gases in the atmosphere is to store more carbon in the Earth's crust, above ground biomass, marine ecosystems, and built environment. So it's a zero-sum game. What does that mean? It means that we shouldn't be talking about emissions reductions and or carbon sequestration, because if there is no underlying carbon sequestration associated with an emissions reduction claim, we haven't changed anything in terms of concentrations of atmospheric heat trapping gases. Strangely, we live in a world where worldwide, if I burn natural gas to make electricity and then substitute biogas for some of my pipeline gas supply, I am deemed to have created a permanent reduction in atmospheric concentrations of heat trapping gases, even if and when I clearly flipped my take or pay pipeline gas agreement into the spot market and sold the gas I didn't use, the pipeline gas I didn't use, the fossil fuel, into the market and made a profit. So if you actually look or think of it as, I'm an old lady, so I think of losing weight a lot. If our goal is to reduce the weight of heat trapping gases in the atmosphere, reducing emissions is like going on a diet, but it's not necessarily losing weight. So the first thing is, I think I want us all to think more in terms of how we are storing incremental, building up backup carbon and nitrogen stocks in solid organic or mineral forms in the Earth's crust and on its surface, because if we're not doing that, we're actually not achieving the goal we say we're striving to achieve. So next slide, please. I just wanted to share, this is my favorite picture of a pile of dirt. And basically, if you go to sort of some of the early science, and I agree with, I think it was Rob, the earlier speaker, who said, I'm not sure I buy this whole saturation thing. But basically, the science says that we've depleted carbon stocks in the top 30 centimeters of our topsoil layer, and that's existing topsoil layer, not what it used to be, by about 50%. And in theory, we have the capacity to build those carbon stocks back up to what they were 300 years ago. So what these numbers show you in theory is the existing carbon stock estimates is also an estimate of the potential for our topsoil layers to draw down and store incremental carbon. In this picture, you see USA is looking at 54 petagrams of incremental carbon storage potential, because that's what the stock is, which is like very close to the 56 petagrams that a prior presenter suggested. That turns into, if you buy the saturation argument, which I'm with Rob, I'm not sure I buy it, but if you can go there because it's a conservative way to think, that's existing US topsoil layer has the capacity to draw down and sequester at least 2.5 trillion tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere. So the question is, how do we do that without reducing food and fiber production? And how do we set ourselves to the task of doing that? Also note, US ranks number 3 and 10 countries account for 60% of the potential. So this isn't, the idea that somehow this is all going to be addressed by doing interesting things in 180 countries worldwide is unrealistic. If Russia, Canada, US, China, Brazil, Indonesia, Australia, Argentina don't move, then we're not going to be moving as a wider population of the earth. Next slide, please. When I look at existing models, and I picked Soils Revealed, Cornell University, Oregon State, to reference here, not necessarily because they're pretty good numbers and everything is uncertain. But if you said, okay, before we decide how to do it, what is the potential for Wisconsin? If you pick the Soils Revealed model as a reference, it suggests that it's not too hard to set yourself a goal in Wisconsin to draw down and store an incremental 5 to 6 million tons CO2 equivalent per year for at least the next 20 years. That's relative to actual 2018 Wisconsin soil organic carbon stocks. And I'm going to move on to that's significant. So what I would say is there's a target. Go for 6 million tons a year. This is just what you can pull into and store in the soil. So let's figure out how to get it done. I also want to sort of you to be conscious of the other side of the story. If the 2000 to 2018 forest and grassland conversion trend that has been realized in Wisconsin is continued. I'm actually not, I don't think it can be continued because so much has happened, but that would equate to Wisconsin transferring an incremental 30 to 50 million tons a year of heat trapping gases to the atmosphere. So why don't we go for a net increase in soil carbon stocks that equate to drawing down 5 to 6 million tons a year, and at the very least avoid the risk of dumping another 30 to 50 million tons a year into the atmosphere. Next slide. Can we go to the next slide, please? Maybe not. I just wanted to leave this for you. So I just said there's 5 to 6 million tons a year of potential in Wisconsin soils, which I think can be realized without reducing food and fiber production. I didn't count the opportunities that exist to reduce enteric fermentation emissions, manure management, CO2, those are emissions. But I do think if a community like the people who are in the room today sat there and said, okay, what are the strategies that get us both that 5 to 6 million tons per year sequestered in soil, while they coincidentally help us realize reductions in these emissions? You're looking at maybe 12 to 15 million tons a year of potential to reduce climate risk and also build a more resilient and productive topsoil layer. If we're just taking for reference, I'm not arguing for or against the policy, the US's objective of reducing nationwide emissions to 50% below 2005 levels by 2030. And if each state was to try to achieve a 50% reduction on its own, I'm not saying that's what policy should say, but just for illustration purposes, Wisconsin's looking for 44 million tons a year by 2030. 12 to 15 million tons a year doesn't maybe sound like a lot, but it's a big chunk of 44. And I challenge you to stare at the state inventory and show me any other opportunities that get you more potential benefit at less cost. I don't think they exist. So this should be a top priority from the perspective of everybody. Usually when I give these slides, I include a slide that I didn't include this time. I'll include it in the follow-up. But in real life, if we are very serious and dedicated policymakers, every policy our governments adopt for any reason, I don't care what the primary goal is, should pass a minimum, at a minimum, the following test, which is the policy doesn't impair any one of these 5 social values. Ideally, it would enhance them. The first is clean and secure water supply. The second, in my view, is clean and secure food supply. Then comes safe and affordable shelter. Then comes secure and affordable energy supply. And I think the 5th one is also approximate access to nature. If we were also saying that our climate policy should be getting ticks in at least 3 out of those 5 measures of good policy, again, we'd be back looking at agriculture and saying, what can we do? Next slide. I'm going to skip. I'll just quickly say, existing CO2 markets don't work. End of story. Full stop. For a whole bunch of reasons, and I think we know, or at least can jointly come up together with a path forward that does work. Existing voluntary markets deliver all of the market control to third-party aggregators at the expense of the stewards of the land. Credit issuance lags are huge. To date, more than 54% of all of the credits that have been ever issued globally in the voluntary market have never been bought by anybody. The prices most buyers are paying are too low. No return is getting to the stewards of the land. I actually believe these are all addressable issues, but the way we address them is we start over. And I just want to give you a little bit of context. 100% of the CO2 credits and government issued CO2 allowances in global circulation today total anywhere from 6 to 8 billion units, credits and allowances, of which, as I've said, over 50% have never been bought by anybody, and the rest have been bought by somebody but are still in circulation. In other words, the initial buyer bought it with the intent to resell. You know what? That sounds like a huge number, but if I account for just scope 1 and narrowly define scope 3 emissions, where scope 3 is just the emissions that are discharged to the atmosphere when the products the companies produced are consumed, when they're delivered to market, less than 100 companies worldwide discharge 32 to 34 billion tons a year. So the whole voluntary market, even at 8 billion tons, is less than 25% of 1 year's emissions discharged by the top 100 companies. There's a huge opportunity to create demand for regenerative or sustainable ag and net carbon sequestration. If we finally get it right, I think we know how to do it. Next slide. I'm going to go quickly and say, let's go to the next slide after this, and say that thinking in terms of carbon intensity is right, is correct. But when we're talking about estimating carbon intensity, reporting carbon intensity. I think what we're getting wrong is when we're talking about food and fiber supply, we're talking about carbon intensity per acre. I'm working on a experimental new protocol to introduce a carbon intensity based credit generation concept. And that denominator in that carbon intensity shouldn't be per acre. It should be per unit of product value. And I'm being hesitant here, delivered to market. So in every established regulated carbon market, rewards are issued and tax credits go to oil and gas producers if their emissions per barrel of oil equivalent output are below a certain level. We shouldn't be talking about emissions per acre. We should be talking about emissions per unit of nutrient or protein value output. Why am I hesitating? I still don't know what the right denominator is to get this right for food and fiber supply. Please, those of you who are great scientists, please tell me what that right denominator is. When we get it right, one protocol should equally apply to animal-based and plant-based food. And I'm desperately searching to figure out what that denominator is, and I haven't got it yet. So everybody smarter than me, please get on that one for me. Next slide. Let's go to the next slide. I want to say, I think it's absolutely essential for the food and fiber producers in the room and their technical advisors and NRCS to get engaged and really work on building this next generation, this new way of looking how voluntary and regulated markets might work. And I want to give you just one illustration of why. And I'm going to argue that the way to ensure government programs and regulatory initiatives make sense is for the industry participants to get ahead of government and pave the way forward. Trial, test, come up with the ideas and show the path forward. What do you get if industry doesn't get engaged? These are screenshots from schedule table 9.1 in the California cap and trade regulation. And in this section of the regulation, it says that if any energy intensive trade exposed industry emits less than this benchmark emission rate per unit of product output, they get free allowances that they can sell to make money on. And if they emit more, they have to buy allowances to stay in business. Look at this table. California has created, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different benchmarks for dairy product manufacturers, where there's a different benchmark, there's a different carbon intensity test for different kinds of condensed milk. If this way of looking at how markets should work spread globally and across the whole food supply chain, you're going to be, just the whole idea of trying to change your mix of butter, fat, milk, and cheese and yogurt offering to meet market design gets untenably complicated. The reason we all need to work together to get this right is this is not a future we want to see go global. And the only way we avoid a future that looks like a complicated version of this is for the food and fiber producers to get directly way more engaged than they are right now. And I'll stop there.
A question or two for Aldyen, if anybody has one. No question. Or there's a time for a question.
I would love to have a conversation with Aiden.
Right. Send your questions to me, Tim, and we can facilitate that.
Yeah. And if the right follow-up is I fly to Wisconsin and we get the right people in the room and we fight with each other for 2.5 days, I'm there.
No. I am 100% on board with your last recommendation, as the processors need to involve. from the entire food chain. But I'd also put a comment on in terms of carbon management and carbon credit origination, the farmer's got to be at the point on that.
Absolutely. Can I just take a minute to just tell you my sneak play? In the new protocol that I'm working with a great team to hopefully bring out within the next 3 months, we're saying first thing is this is how you document food supply chain, and we're starting with beef carbon intensity, and you won't see anything that looks particularly unusual in that. And then we're saying you report your carbon intensity down the supply chain. Again, you won't see anything particularly unique in that. And then we're saying, by definition, that means carbon credits are bundled in the supply chain. And then if and when anyone in the supply chain wants to sell real interest in -1 ton CO2 equivalent to anybody outside the supply chain, like Exxon, go for it. You just add a balancing +1 ton CO2 equivalent that you're reporting through to Tyson's or Walmart. And I'm hoping that shows people there's a way to empower the producers. If they're not going to pay you what you need to be paid to keep your carbon intensity low, and Enron's going to, you can unbundle your credit and sell it to Enron.
Absolutely.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Alden. We really appreciate your being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great meeting. I've loved the presentations that I've seen. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.